Good evening. Did you all enjoy the film? Oh, awesome. Good evening. My name is Teddy Reeves, and I serve as the creator and producer of the gOD-Talk film. I'm going to go down the row and introduce the folks to you, and we're going to engage in a talk back. We want to hear from you if you have questions. They're going to be walking around and allow you to ask some questions of us. To my immediate, what is that, left. I'm a little directionally challenged at times. It's Kim Moyer. Kim is the director and writer and producer of the film. Beside him is Erica Galt, who you see appear in the film, but she's also the director of the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life. And beside her is Bashir Muhammad, who is the senior researcher at Pew Research Center, who you also saw in the film. I'll ground the film a little bit, and then we'll jump right into this is, and Erica really brought us there, 5 years of filming. 66 interviews, more than 120 hours of content. We began this journey back in 2018 in Los Angeles, where we piloted the first conversation and knew we were going to, the end result was a documentary, but we didn't fully know what the story was going to be. So we spent hours upon hours on the road going to capture the stories. And what I hope you saw in the film and what I hope you experience is the breadth of the African American religious experience, right? That it is not just Abrahamic traditions, but that our experiences have moved beyond historically and also contemporarily. So what I want to do, I'm going to jump in. I want to start with you, Kim. If you could talk about the process of bringing the film to life, of taking all of this content over these years and bringing this story to fruition.
Okay, that's not a big question to answer. I'm the only one here that did not appear in the film, so this is my moment. One of the things that I think was important about the film and the process of getting the story on film was to listen carefully to all of our individual subjects and find out what was unique about the stories that they had to tell. As you saw in the film, some of those stories were very difficult. They were, based in trauma. And we wanted at all times to be respectful and sensitive to how we dealt with those issues. And at the same time, keeping it in line of thinking like a filmmaker to make the stories as palatable, may be the wrong word, but compelling, so that everyone was with us throughout the entire range of the hour and 55 minutes. I was the shooter for probably 98% of the entire film. So, I shot everything. I knew where the camera was. I knew where the individuals who we were talking to were, and I set the room up. And Teddy went from there and basically started to examine and talk to people about what it was that they were experiencing. And the goal at that point was to make it pretty, but also to make sure that everything that was said when we got back to the edit room, that we were able to look at the best of what each and every individual had to say and be able to put that together in the film. So what I most find valuable about the film is that everybody has these nuggets of wisdom, youngest to oldest. And some of these things have been passed along, and some of them are things that they've learned through trial and error. But the wisdom of the film speaks the loudest to me. So if that's, I'm sort of, I guess, maybe on the outskirts or the peripheral of your question, but we wanted the best of what everyone had to say to be on film. So I think hopefully that's more or less where we ended up. That's the goal.
Bashir, I want to toss it to you, right? That Pew began this work 2007, 2014, subsequently 2021. What was so different, right, about partnering with the museum in this journey that we've been on for the past 5 years? How's that experience been? But then also, has anything changed in the data, right? A lot of our filming took place before COVID. We did 1 year of filming. I guess we were in the midst of COVID. But has anything changed as it relates to Black millennials and faith?
Sure. So I guess to sort of deal with the first question, at Pew, we're really good at collecting data and trying to find a way to understand, analyze complex stories. And the story of Black faith in America is a complex story, and it's one that we are excited to dig into. But then the next step, we're not an academic organization. We're not in the business of analyzing stories just for the sake of analyzing it. We want to inject it into conversations and have data be able to move forward in important conversations. So that's where the partnership was really valuable for us, because it allowed us to, in a very concrete way, bring data to bear on these conversations that the museum organized with a wide range of religious leaders, from the head of the Black Non-Believers Association to Christian pastors. And I was able to say, well, here's some data that can help sort of elevate your conversation, to give some context around the prevalence of some of the things that you're seeing. This is very common, this is less common, this is more common among these age groups, those sorts of things. And so that's really the role that we played, and why it was different, and why it was really a great opportunity, because we were able to, in a real concrete way, bring data into these conversations. And then the documentary allows folks who weren't able to be in the conversations in the moment to benefit from that same set of conversations, that same set of understanding, that same nuance and life that people brought into their own stories. So I think that's really where we saw it as different. In terms of the way things have changed, I'd say probably the biggest change is a move toward more like digital religion, is what you might call it. There's a little bit of talk about this at the end of the documentary, but this is definitely the case that we see in the data as well, that many people, especially Black Americans, really embraced digital religion, whether it's streaming their services or podcasts, all these sort of things, in a way that was much less prevalent before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, actually, Black houses of worship actually were a little behind on some of these things. It was really sort of like the big white evangelical churches that were doing the streaming, the mega churches. And the pandemic really pushed a lot of institutions to say, oh, well, we need to move forward on that. Especially for a while, that was the only thing, that was the only game in town, right? Like if you wanted to do services, it had to be digital. And now that the churches, the mosques, et cetera, have opened up, people have come back into the sanctuary, but many have also retained a tie to that digital. It's like, well, I'm still gonna go to the sanctuary now that it's an option, but you know what? I really like being able to stream it as well. And maybe like I go to a certain congregation that's nearby, but there's a really powerful pastor that I heard up in Texas or in Atlanta or wherever, and so I like to stream their service as well. And so that's something that we see in the data as well that's been a big change, is this, since the pandemic, there's a return to in-person services, but there's still a sort of retention of the gains in digital religion that we've seen.
Erica, if you don't know, Erica is a foremost scholar in digital Black religion, and so I really want to sit here for a moment and talk about, right, we hear these traumas throughout the film. We hear Black women talk about their issues in Black religious spaces. We hear LGBTQIA plus identifying individuals talk about their traumas and experiences. What have digital spaces offered these individuals as it relates to religious participation? And I think we start hitting on it some in the film, but really thinking about millennials in one group in particular. How has the digital created new spaces for them?
Yeah, so as Bashir mentions, you have that period of COVID that really brings the rest of the Black church online in some ways that they hadn't imagined, but Black women had, and they have been online. You know, so you had all of these folks that were on the margins of religious communities that were early adopters of digital technology. And I think it's a really beautiful story because it really shows patterns around technology for Black folks. We're often depicted as a part of the digital divide. We're kind of lagging, but folks of us who have needed to have been online and used technology as a pattern of survival since we've been here in the Americas. We've always figured out where's the technology and how do we use it to simply survive. And so Black women being online, queer folks being online, LGBT communities going online was not anything new. And those were the folks that actually, the interesting thing was leading the Black church. And I think what's most fascinating in my research is looking at the way that has shifted the way we think about Black religion. And what excites me about a documentary like this, because it's really mapping onto that transformation that's been occurring in Black religion and what you see in the data as well.
Awesome. As we keep talking, we're going to encourage you to get your questions. If you have some questions, feel free to get ready to pose those questions and to write those questions down. I do want to move some in the film, Erica, and start with you. How does it feel to see yourself and to tell your story, right? That you recently joined us on the team, and so you got to really sit through, and we came to Arizona to capture your story. How was that experience? Talk about what it means to see yourself and your expression and your experience on film.
Yeah, so it's strange because I am, well, they call them now geriatric millennials, but I don't own that. I am an elder millennial. And as one of the elder millennials, I saw the kind of evolution of Black faith that was happening over the last couple of decades, and then I became an objective observer in a sense as an ethnographer. So when I first met Teddy and Kim, it was a very interesting time in my life where I was transitioning from observer to actually, from participant in the community to actually observing it as a researcher and trying to think through how I inserted myself in the story. And so the documentary gave me a chance to interject the I and to say these are important stories that we speak out of our own experiences. They are also necessary to the scholarship and also to the future of Black religion. Like, these are stories that really need to be told. So I see all of that and that kind of moment and trying to articulate that for myself and speak out of those kind of sensibilities. I was also leaving or had recently left my religious tradition. And so really thinking about those multiple kind of worlds that I was living in and trying to articulate that. It's really interesting to see that come back. It feels like a lifetime ago. I feel older, you know, like I look at that and I'm like, wow, she was so much younger. That was 5 years ago. Yeah. So it's strange in that regard as well.
What's interesting is that we shot B-roll of you teaching your class that does not appear in the film, but Erica approached her class with a hip-hop sensibility. She performed slam poem, if I'm not mistaken, and her class is a diverse class, but there was a give and take in your course that we obviously were not able to include in this piece, but maybe something that we'd be able to revisit later on. But yeah, if you want to really embrace, where you were at that particular point, you should see that footage because you were commanding in your environment. And
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I'll see to it that you get a clip.
You almost have a lot of moments like that of things
Indeed.
that you experience, because that was just after the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter that you all came. So you all were like living in the midst of history. Not to steal your position, but I've wondered, what is that like? Like, you had these incredible moments that didn't make it in here, as incredible as this is. I wonder what some of those moments are.
Well, they were varied, and actually every individual principal had moments that we were not able to include. It's interesting that you mentioned the death of Kobe Bryant. I think we may have been at breakfast one day, and that happened. And I saw it on my phone, and I thought to myself, man, that's not funny. Is this a joke of some sort? And then I started going to different sites. You hit the Post, you hit the New York Times, and this is a story, this is actually happening. And I think at the time they didn't know if he actually died in a crash. I think that was up in the air. But those were the types of moments. Of course, we were coming out of COVID, so we were actually still engaging with COVID restrictions in a number of spaces where we went to individually interview with people. I mean, there were scenarios, particularly during the God-Talk series, where people would not necessarily allow us in the house. We had to come in and have the camera set up and then give them communication, and then the technician would wait at the door, and the show itself, the God-Talk show itself, would occur. But it was a scary time in some respects. But we got to see, in some very intimate ways, digital religion at work.
I would also add, we were filming as when Nipsey Hussle died. And if you notice in the film, we go to the mural of Nipsey, which is right outside of his store that he owned. So we were filming right outside of that space with Siobhan, and Kim, I don't think we've ever told this story publicly, but as we were out there, brothers who were a part of the organization that Nipsey was a part of were still policing this space. And so we told them we were from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And they began to kind of protect us, to allow us to film in this space, to tell that story, because they knew that we were going to lift Nipsey up as well in the film. And so as you're talking about those instances and those stories, I can remember the store was boarded up and things were going on, and we went. Kim has the camera, I'm out there, and Siobhan's out there, and she's a native of the area, and so we're navigating this space of, we want to film, we want to tell this story, but it was these instances, right, of being on the road. We were talking about backstage, the car getting hit, right, that we've had all of these instances that we've been filming to really capture this story. And there's so many other stories around principles and getting in the house and being able to capture folks through COVID, and staying in hotels where we couldn't really engage because of COVID. Was it 2021 it all begins to run together? I think 2021 we were on the road about 100 nights trying to finish the film. Because COVID had stopped us from shooting, and we knew we had a deadline.
That was 22.
22, I'm telling you all, it runs all together at this point. But we were on the road, and so we became very much so partners in crime of getting and going and traveling. We've gone to Paris, we went to Switzerland, we went to Sweden. So several folks that are in the film are not necessarily African Americans that are based here in the US, but they are doing ministry work in other countries. And so we wanted to also include that in the film to talk about, again, this expansiveness that our experiences and our stories go beyond these borders. And so there were some other places we wanted to go, and conflict is happening in the world and you can't go, or COVID happened and we couldn't get there. But it was 5 years of really trying to ensure that in whatever showed up, and Bashir was on the road with us a lot as well, whatever showed up, from going to Pharrell at the Something in the Water Festival with no Ubers and walking, and my feet still hurt. You know what I'm saying? To being abroad, that the goal, and I hope as we invite you all to come forth with your questions, was that we showed this diversity. right? That all too often when we talk about religious films and we talk about Black religion, we don't get to see some of these folks' stories. We don't get to hear from Black atheists. We don't get to hear from a voodoo priestess. We don't get to hear from people practicing Yoruba traditions or those who may be in Christian traditions but are in lesser known traditions, but that all of these voices we try to elevate and try to show the totality of that. So what I'm gonna do is go to a few questions that you all wrote on paper. One of the questions, let's see, I'll save this one because that's a good one to end on. The film is an affirming conversation starter. Traditional distribution and panels have limitations. What are you doing digitally to keep the conversation and the data collection going? Which is a great question. I will start there, and I welcome anyone else to join in. I think there's many different ways. In the next few weeks, there will be, or months, there will be a website where you can actually get the totality of people's stories, right? We only have 2 hours to tell you their stories, but we sat and did oral history interviews with every person that you see in the film. So there's a subsequently hour and a half, 2-hour interview that goes in more depth about their own individual stories, from principals to experts. And so those stories will be available online. But also a lot of our work to this digital conversation is a lot of our collecting has been moving into the digital. So if you were familiar with the shot in the film of Tim Bowman and Spirit of Faith Church as they were exercising and performing, that is something we collected into our archive here at the museum because we want to see how religious institutions are engaging with the digital. How are they moving into the digital realm? So some of that data collection as well. And then all of the items from gOD-Talk, from the film to the making of the film to the conversations, all of those things, the 7 conversations are available online on our museum YouTube page, so you can go back and get the fullness of, you may have saw Candace talking about being trifling anyway. You can get the fullness of that story and the fullness of that panel. So I'll start there, but if there's some more things as well.
Well, I would just add to that at the Pew Research Center, we have continued to collect data on these topics, and there's an extensive report that we've put out that, it's probably in total over 100 pages long, but there's like a number, goes through in depth a lot of different topics on the way that the church intersects with questions about political questions about gender, questions about practice, the ways in which Black Catholics are different from Black Protestants, the way in which Black evangelicals are different from historically Black Protestant denominations. So we have an extensive report that goes into that, and it's a topic that we continue to collect data on.
What's the response of traditional Black houses of faith to the Pew data and the film?
They've been really interested. There's a world in which you get defensiveness. Like, I've gone into spaces and you get sort of defense. Well, how do I really know? And how do we trust? And why do we think? I haven't seen much of that. I think because a lot of the data that we're finding, a lot of the stories that we're showing resonate. They can sort of recognize, oh no, this is really happening. It is true that the young people are more distant, are engaging in a different way. And so there's been an interest in understanding, well, what's going on and why is that happening? What are the contours of those differences? And it's also the case that not all of the data that we've found is negative. We find in our data, and we talk about here, a continued commitment to respect for the Black houses of worship, Black churches. One of the folks in the documentary even makes a comment about how, on the one hand, she's very open within the church to pushing them, to criticizing, to moving them forward, but is also, on the other hand, going to defend the church when other folks come for it. And so that's a story that we see in the data as well. For example, we talked about COVID earlier, and we asked a survey question asking people, who would you trust for information about COVID? And clergy are more respected than the media, are more respected than newscasters, are more respected. They're very well respected on some, even in this space. It's not about God, it's about health, but at some level, there's a recognition that the Black church has played and continues to play an important role. And so I think that's another way in which Black religious leaders are open to hearing, okay, well, there's some respect, but also there are these concerns. There's sort of balancing that allows them, I think, to engage with what we're finding.
To the ending part, well, we just premiered the film last night. So tonight is the second night of the premiere of the film. And so as we continue to go out into community, there's screenings in Nashville next week. There's some in San Antonio coming up. We will begin to get feedback from these individuals and from these houses of worship. And so I can say from last night, and Kim and Erica and Bashir, you may have, it was very well received, that individuals, we kept hearing that people saw themselves and they felt affirmed in where they find themselves and where they may be on their own spiritual journeys, which is what we wanted. We wanted people to see themselves, whether you are in traditional space and you've decided to stay, to the point of Candace Bimbo, like, Black women ain't going nowhere, right? But to someone like Rashid, who said, I've walked away, but I leave space for other people who may be there, right, to integrate into themselves. We wanted people to see themselves. There's another question, and I think it really hits on this. And the last two questions I'll make sure to answer as I'm closing, because my timekeeper is keeping me abreast of my time. This question comes from, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I find more people of color entering spiritual spaces that are more holistic and integrative. Is there research to support Black people being drawn to polytheism?
The research shows that basically there's an incredible diversity, that there are certainly Black folks that are engaged in a range of things, whether we're talking about Christianity, we're talking about Unitarianism, where they're talking about the Baha'i faith. So we definitely see an incredible diversity, and that's really what the research shows, is that there's no one way that Black people engage with faith, despite the fact that the other thing it shows is that there is a lot of continued reliance on faith in a whole host of things. What that looks like varies.
And I think also I'll add to that point, right, that the film shows this spiritual hybridity that many millennials are living in, right, that individuals are willing to Tamil, right, who says that I'm a mystic, but if in our full interview with Tamil, she also still reads the Bible and sends her sons to Sunday school, right? That there's this integration that is not new to Black people. I always say that millennials are not doing anything new, we're just doing it out loud. And so I think that that's what the film is really highlighting in many ways, is that this spiritual hybridity that millennials are really practicing in this liminal space, that we're willing to take these pieces that work for us. We're willing to integrate things to create our own faith formation. But as Michael said, we're not clean, right? That we've not done something and superseded something and created something new without our own issues. That Black women, I can think of my grandmother, I can think of aunts who have always been spiritually hybrid. Again, they may not have talked about it in church, but if they opened their Bible, there were some rose petals or there were some other things situated in between the crevices of those books, right? That this hybridity is not new, but we have a generation that's willing to say it out loud and willing to deal with the ramifications of saying it out loud, even if that means walking away. And so I think that that's what we're seeing in the film, and to that point, the nuancing of the nuns, right? That this hybridity is happening amongst our folks.
I would just add as well, I think Melvis Sampson really captures this well in her kind of comments, and just thinking about digital hush harbors in themselves and kind of harping back to the earlier hush harbor, which was not owned. It was not the sole possession of the Black church, but this was a space where you had several different religions, and religion wasn't so important as the faith practices that came out of that. So as you say, this is nothing new. We keep not evolving, but continuing along this kind of continuum of religious observance, always for Black folk.
Absolutely. This question is, what was the impetus to initiate the God-Talk conversations? And then the final question was, and I want to make sure I'll answer out, do you plan to make another documentary or show after this? So the impetus of it began in 2015. I used to serve as an executive pastor of a church. And so in that capacity, I had some questions around what was happening because we couldn't get young people to come to church. We were in New York City. And so what was going on in that space? I began to ask questions. I began to survey the young people in the community and the young people who had been in the church for years. And so those questions started there. Why didn't they want to come? Was it transportation? We lived in a two-fare zone, right? So if anybody is familiar with New York, two-fare zone mean I got a train and bus, right? And that's a lot. But also thinking about, I knew it wasn't a unique thing, right? It wasn't just our church. It wasn't just Christian churches. I had Jewish imams, I had Jewish rabbis friends in New York who were struggling to getting young people to come outside of high holy days, right? So it wasn't just a Black issue, it was white religious institutions struggling as well. And so these questions begin to percolate then. And as we got to the museum and I left full-time ministry to come become a curator here at the museum, those questions continued to emerge in Pew's data and the work that was being done. And so that was some of the impetus of it back in 2018, was to answer the questions that started for me even well before then when I was in divinity school. Like, what is going on with Black faith, and particularly my generation, as Erica said, as a geriatric millennial, which I don't take that term, but as an older millennial, what was happening?
Can I add something to that? When initially I was hired for the center, I was trying to figure out how to incorporate my background, which is essentially in broadcast and film. And my director who hired me made the point that this is probably as good a place for you to be as any in order to bring your skill set to bear. And one of the things I learned early on in our process and in our acquainting ourselves with each other and what each other were pursuing was that Teddy had more of a well-rounded look or a need to examine questions around millennial existence, and particularly around faith. And I thought that in my particular instance, I could work very closely with him because he had these questions that were, I don't want to say fully formed, but they were in the process of becoming fully formed. And it was easy to become a partner with him in that regard because he had a desire to want to dig into this dirt and find out what essentially was there, what was there to nurture, what was there to tell this story. So it was a very mutual sort of collaboration.
Absolutely. To the final point, we will be going into, I don't think we're announcing yet, but we'll be going into season 2 of God-Talk, pre-production we're in fall, so in the next few weeks. So we'll be announcing soon what that conversation will be about and what it will look like and look at. But we have right now really been planning for the film to be seen over this next year. So our goal is to be traveling across this country and abroad to ensure that other folks get an opportunity, whether they are in the North, whether they're in the rural South, whether they're on the West Coast, to experience this and engage this work. Can we give all of our panelists a round of applause? We are grateful for you all being here. Please, please, please take photos on the step and repeat. Tag gOD-Talk. Use the Smith. Tag the museum at NMAAHC. Use the hashtag gOD-Talk. We have some things for you as you're walking out the door this evening to say thank you for coming. And again, share the word. There are several screenings that will happen here at the museum. This was the only other night screening for these next few weeks, but the remainder of the screenings will happen at 2 p.m. here at the museum, and individuals can go online and get tickets. Again, thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you for being here. We'll be standing up and around, so if you have any questions, feel free. Have a good night.